Hello and welcome. Specifically, this session is fostering digital collaboration. So, we are going to explore digital tools and resources for supporting student collaboration and community and connections, whether you are in an entirely virtual environment, a hybrid blended environment, or in person. So, a lot of these skills will focus on digital tools, but the theories and the beliefs behind them themselves are transferable to a variety of environments. So, my slides are here if you would like to have access to them. And it wouldn't be a PD session with me if there wasn't some type of corny joke in here. So feel free to laugh at that or just move ahead if it's too much of a cheesy joke. So, our goals for the session: identifying 3 or more strategies to foster student collaboration in a variety of learning environments, and then ideally make a plan for yourself to implement one of these different methods in your learning environment, whether it's Monday, someday, or next week. So, in terms of UDL connections, providing students the opportunity to work together, to communicate with each other, really intersects with the framework in a variety of ways. It helps with recruiting interest. Some students feel like working with a group maybe minimizes threats and distractions for them. That's a more welcoming environment where they feel more comfortable to take risks. Others, maybe not so much. That's why it's important to provide it as an option. The other piece here is that there's actually a specific guideline in sustaining effort and persistence on the UDL guidelines and engagement that specifically mentions fostering collaboration in community. So obviously that connects with what we're talking about today. And then providing students with the opportunity to connect with each other and bounce ideas off of one another, and maybe a typed out response or a virtual community type of conversation like what we're having right now is also another option for students in terms of action and expression. So there's even more connections on here, but those are the really big ones that I want you to think about today, is that it supports both those sides of the framework. So before I get too far into things, there are some helpful vocabulary terms to know before we dive too far into my session. And that is just the difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning. Now, you've probably gotten very familiar with these terms throughout e-learning, but just know that when I talk about these, synchronous is teacher is in charge of the time, it's at a scheduled time, it's in sync, live, and in the moment. So it's not student paced, it's really teacher paced. Whereas asynchronous is student pace. They can drop in and out of an activity, complete it at their own time. There's not a set schedule of when they all have to be on a Google call, working on something at the same time at the exact same moment and waiting for teacher guidance to do that. So when we talk about collaboration activities, it's helpful to provide kind of a blend of both. Yes, it's great to have our students live on that Google Meet call with us, all talking and bouncing off ideas from one another in the moment. But sometimes, as we know, that's not always the most realistic option every single day, every activity. So that's why it's helpful to put different options here and really facilitate both of those ways for connections. So I'm just going to go through a couple of different tips here. Some of them at the beginning will focus on just some ways to help you manage grouping students in a virtual environment, because as you know, it's not as easy as just looking around the room and saying, all right, this side of the room you group together, this side of the room you group together, because you're scattered across different spaces. And then we'll go through some different activities and different templates that you can use depending on what type of conversation and collaboration you want to facilitate with your students. So to start off, a really helpful tool for grouping your students and for really a variety of other things is a free tool called Flippity. Now, Flippity is really popular amongst elementary teachers because it has a lot of fun little review games and very elementary focused things. But there are some great things on here for teachers of any grade level. And really, even if you're not a teacher, if you're a principal, there's resources on here that you can use with your staff for professional development and more. I know I have used this tool when I've trained teachers on things before as a way to show them how to use it, but also leverage some of its advantages. And what it is it's a website that has a bunch of different Google spreadsheets on it. And you don't have to be a spreadsheet wizard to be able to use these tools. The spreadsheets are just specially programmed. They have special functions and equations in them that make them basically an interactive name picker, randomizer, games, and those things. And you just use your copy of the spreadsheet to plug in the information and customize it to your need. So an example here, the grouping one I showed you, there are tons of them, and they even added a new tab here on the website that are e-learning recommendations. So one specifically for teachers. And there's lots of different examples and games on here. There's badges, leaderboards. I said games. There's random name pickers, so that's helpful. This is where you can see the different ways to use this tool and to get the spreadsheet if you want to use it for more groups, as well as the seating chart. So it's a really helpful tool. Again, you can just type in names here if you needed to, and it shows you through how you can do jigsaw activities with it. It's a fantastic resource. So the way that I would see this being helpful in a virtual environment is drop in your students' names from PowerSchool and have it randomized. And then if you need to make a group, you just take a screenshot of this or download it and then put that on a slide like what I did. This is just a screenshot. And then your students know who they're going to be working with that day. You can have separate ones for every class period. So that's a helpful thing to use. Another helpful resource is a tool within It's Learning. If you want to leverage something that's already in one platform, pretty familiar, it's helpful to meet with students in small groups during e-learning for a couple of different reasons. You can connect with students who maybe need additional review, check in with students who reach out for help, and maybe it's a way to hear from students that you haven't heard from very often. Some students may be on a whole group Google Meet that's a little intimidating for them, and this is a more accommodating space for them to share their questions or concerns. So what you could do is set up some appointment slots for students or put them in groups already and tell them what time to check in with you. And a quick way that you can group students is through the registration tool on It's Learning. I have a video demo linked here, and there's also a guide that's linked in the description of that demo. It walks you through it. But what the registration tool does is it allows students to select basically a time of day they want to meet with you, or you can kind of make that decision for them if you set up the tool. But what it does is it puts students in a small group afterwards, and then you can use that group to send messages to just them, to send them a Google Meet link. Instead of having to sort through your whole class, you can target that specific group and just send a message to those select students. All right, so that's just some teacher efficiency workflows types of tips. Now we're going to move into some practical tips for different conversations and group work formats for your students. So in terms of group conversations and getting students talking when you're all in the same space together on a Google Meet and video conferencing, leveraging the chat is a really helpful way to do that. Again, some students might find that less intimidating than, say, turning off their microphone or turning on their microphone, turning on their video. And that's more supportive of student bandwidth as well. If they have not the best internet access, it's a lot easier for them to turn off video and microphone and participate in the chat. Now, obviously, there might be times that you want to actually hear from them, and that's perfectly okay. But always referencing the chat as a place for them to ask questions and to share ideas is a helpful starting point and can be a really great way to leverage conversation. There are so many tools out there that students can use and that teachers can use that sometimes it becomes really overwhelming. There's so much technology and it's a lot to handle when really just using the chat is one simple way that you can fall back on and leverage to your advantage. So you don't need to have every shiny tool under the sun for students to be talking with each other. It can just be as simple as saying, share your thought in the chat, or if you have a question, share it in the chat and having them connect with each other there. It's a good way to start a lesson as well. So that is just a helpful thing. And just know that on Google Meet, if there is a point in time where you need them to stop chatting so you can move on to the next activity and then turn it back on again, you can do that in the host controls. You can toggle the chat on and off. All right, other thing here to help facilitate large group conversations so it's not crickets and awkward is to use a fun conversation wheel. So just random questions to get students going. This is also really great for any group project if students are maybe still getting to know each other or on a virtual space and maybe they feel awkward in starting the conversation. I know I've been in trainings before and we've been in breakout rooms or we've been talking and they're just like, here's your group you're working with. And I don't really know very many of those people. And then you have people who unmute themselves at the exact same time. It can just be a little awkward. So the conversation wheel is a good way to get students talking with each other that maybe feels a little bit more welcoming and less intimidating than something specifically tied to your content right off the bat. So this is another free website. It's a little similar to Flippity, but it's called wordwall.net. And what it has is this fun little conversation wheel that you can customize. There's even more resources here on this website where you can pull up different flashcards, do whatever you like. This is the one that I was drawn to. And it always plays this little song. You drag the wheel to spin and then it brings up a discussion question. And as you go through those different discussion questions, you can eliminate them on the wheel so that you don't keep having the same one selected over and over again. I spin it and then it zooms in because it is a little zoomed out right now. Maybe that's the conversation with students. They can share in the chat. Maybe they unmute themselves and you call on them one by one. That's just an opportunity there. So if I wanted to eliminate that, I could. We already one. Spin it again and go from there. So that is a helpful one for just building community and really kind of checking in with students, getting the conversation started, even when you're not physically there in the classroom together. And again, it is totally free to use. The next one that's really helpful is Jamboard. So Jamboard is an interactive whiteboard tool, and I talk about this one quite a bit because it's a favorite of mine. And why it's helpful is that all of your students can be sharing ideas and writing on this interactive whiteboard at once. So there's lots of templates and things out there. Jamboard has really launched to new heights, and lots of teachers are utilizing it for e-learning and for remote teaching because it's very well aligned and conducive to that environment. So I'm sure if you just Google Jamboard templates, there's some that can come up for your subject area. I linked a few examples here, but just to show you what Jamboard looks like. So if you were using Google Meet to be conferencing with your students, you can pull up a Google Jamboard from scratch or pull it up from your Google Drive all within a Google Meet without having to open up another tab. You will have to change the settings so that students can edit it because by default, it's always set to can view. But that could be a great way to get ideas flowing for students. The way Jamboard works is if you just pull up jamboard.com, and I have some examples and templates on here, all different ones, but it is a blank whiteboard space, and you can add Post-it notes to it, drawings, and text. The really awesome new feature is that you can set a background so that when students start editing this, they can't move the different things that I already had on here. So this is actually a Google slide that I screenshot and I saved as an image, and then I uploaded it and set it as my background right here so that whenever my students participate, they don't mess up my little question I want them to answer, and they just move their little note card around. So if I wanted to add another Post-it note, I could. Add it there, and students have the ability to add these little post notes if they need to when they get there. So you can move it around to these different places. And this is an example of just kind of a random question to get conversation flowing with students. It could be a fun one to start a lesson. But other ways you can use this, there's other features here. There's a pen, so you can circle things, highlight ideas for students, and they can do that as well. They can add pictures onto a Jamboard if they needed to. There's text boxes. If they needed to explain their answer, they can add a text box. Move it around wherever they needed to. There's a laser pointer for you if you wanted to highlight something and then it disappears after you move. To set the background, you have some options, but you can upload your own picture there. Just have to be saved on your computer. And then the cool thing is you can add different slides to, they're called frames, but I think of them as slides because it's very much like a slideshow. The cool thing is that you can add different frames to a Jamboard, so it can be multiple frames at once. So here's an example of what a blank one looks like. And here's an example of another one that I set a picture as a background, so students could check in on this one, or they could just mark on the screen how they're feeling so that I know when class starts, this is where we are today. And again, this would be a little bit easier if you just want it to be more anonymous, but if you want it to be more showing what student answered what, then I would use PeerDeck on Google Slides. This could be a fun activity here. I've seen people use Jamboard as a way to reflect as well, where they add Post-it notes to share their main takeaway from the lesson. It can be an idea board when students collaborate with each other. And to give students access, you grab a shareable link like you would any other Google resource, and you can share it to where anyone with the link can edit or view, and then drop that in your It's Learning or in a Google Meet conference call. So that is Jamboard. It's a pretty slick tool. And I know a lot of teachers have really liked using it, especially now that they added that background feature so that you can have custom Jamboard slides. And then when you give students editing access, they don't mess up your bottom layer. All right. Since I kind of started to mention this on the last one, I got a little ahead of myself. The other fun tool that you can use to encourage conversation with students and to check in with them and get conversation flowing and community going is using PeerDeck. So PeerDeck is an interactive slideshow presentation tool. And what it allows you to do is to turn any static slide into one that students can add text, pictures, images right on, all within your own slideshow. And all you have to do is just share students a link to your PeerDeck presentation, and they can have access to it from there. And what's cool is you can set that up to where it's remote, asynchronous, so students go through it at their own pace, or it's a live instructor-paced session. So the way that I envision this being helpful for conversation and community with your students is that you use it live on a Google Meet, just so their answers spark conversation and dialogue afterwards, but it's totally up to you. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time walking you through how to do every single piece on PeerDeck because that's its own workshop session because it's got so many features. I have linked that here in case you wanted to watch those and earn PGPs. But there are lots of ways that you can build community with PeerDeck. And I put a lot of examples on a slideshow right here. You can make copies of it, edit it, do whatever you need to do. These are just some ones that I crowdsourced and then brainstormed from fun activities that I used to use with my students in the classroom. And whenever you see the little PeerDeck watermark at the bottom, just make sure you don't delete that because that is what makes it a PeerDeck interactive slide. And if you delete that, then students can't do anything with the slide anymore. So again, here's the one I was showing you earlier. So these are all ones where students would draw or circle their answer, and then maybe that sparks conversation in the classroom, like where are all the hot chocolate fans or hot cider fans? And here's some more fun ones, and you can even customize them to be more for your content area, serving as a review, but also a conversation starter there as well. Tons of them there. Just check-in type of questions, asking students how they're feeling, and just some random fun questions to get conversation flowing and to learn more about your students as well. So that is PeerDeck. All right, another helpful tool for facilitating a large group conversation is YoTeach. And this one is great for asynchronous. So when students aren't all in that same Google Meet with you at the same time, maybe you keep this open for a period of time. But this is a back channel chat. So it's almost like a class chat room discussion tool. And students can add pictures to their responses. They can illustrate, add whatever content media they need to. And it works well on phones, computers, Chromebooks, any device, you name it. And it's totally free. So what I would envision this being helpful for is if you are having students work on something and they're kind of checking in and working on it at different points during the day, you set up this conversation chat and they can just be dropping in comments and conversation there as they work. So I did link a tutorial here, but this is what YoTeach looks like. And again, there's even more tutorials and things there. It shows you how to use it in action. And whenever you are ready to launch the tool, it shows you additional features here. All right, next one is really fostering that collaboration and working together between students on actual activities. So we kind of went over some ways to manage conversations and to facilitate dialogue as a whole large group, but now it's more how to do that in small groups with students, especially if you're doing asynchronous and they're working at things at different times. These next activities I'm showing you, the students don't all have to be on the same Google Meet call to be working on these activities together. This is a little bit more flexible and can fit maybe a few more of your learning activities than the last things I showed you. So this first tip and tutorial is basically making a vocabulary activity a little bit more collaborative and having students share ideas and work with each other. So this is a tried and true activity. If you're a social studies teacher, you've probably seen this one before, but it's called a Frayer model. And it's basically having students manipulate their understanding of a vocabulary term in a couple of different ways. So they write the definition, they can illustrate it. The fun thing that I like to do with this is if you're using a Google slide, they add an illustration, but also a video so they can pull something from YouTube. But they can also add facts, whatever you want them to do, they can do that. And there's tons of examples out there that show the Frayer model in action. But the example and idea here is that you have students work on different sections of this activity together. So because it is a Google slide, students have the ability to all be working on this at the same time together. They could be sharing idea and be sharing information. So you can make a copy of this and fill it in with whatever vocab list you need to, and student names can go here. And then what students would do, or as the teacher, you put the vocab word here, maybe leave it up to the students to come up with words that stood out to them from a reading or from a presentation. And then you can assign them specific vocab terms to work on, or you color code it and they do certain activities here. So maybe one student writes the definitions, and student B always looks for a video, and student C looks for a picture, and student D looks for 5 connecting terms. So that's a way that you could do this. The other way is that students are responsible for certain words, and then they pull the slide together and then share it with their classmates. The cool thing about it is if you divide it up here, then students are all working on the same vocabulary term. So if they get stuck, they have someone to bounce ideas off of because they're still manipulating their understanding of one common word. But again, that means that one student's constantly doing the same activity. So it's kind of up to you on how you would like to do that, but you can make it your own. And it does not have to be social studies related for that to be a successful learning activity. I put a math class example here because I have seen teachers use this in really any type of subject area and they've enjoyed it. So this is one where the students actually came up with a review slideshow before a test and they were all working on it together in small groups and then contributed to a whole class presentation after that. So it's almost like a glossary as they went through the unit. Other ways that you can facilitate conversation is, again, leveraging the awesome cloud-based collaborative nature of G Suite tools. So the wonderful thing with Google tools is you don't really have to work alone in your own silo anymore. You can all be sharing and working on a resource together, which is a really powerful, simple thing to use in e-learning and remote teaching that doesn't require a whole lot of setup other than students just sharing a Google Doc together. So like I was saying earlier with using the chat, it doesn't always have to be super complex. It can just be as simple as working on a shared Google resource together. And that's exactly what these resources are here. They are Google Docs and slides that students definitely have some scaffolding here provided by the teacher, but could be working on it together and be sharing information. So the idea here is that students are analyzing different resources, whether it's a video, a historical document, or a reading. They're working together to analyze that and answer guiding questions. So the example here is a social studies one where they are looking at a historical document, a primary source, and then students, it's all color coded here which ones that they answer. So student 1 does red, student 2 does yellow, and then they work together as a group to come up with concluding statements. So they have to be working together to do this last part because they've all looked at different pieces and analyzed different parts of this primary source. The other example that is here is a scavenger hunt, and this is in Google Slides instead of Google Docs, and you can do this with a science class activity, a math class activity. It doesn't have to be a social studies one, but it's a text the students were given, and they were put in teams, and then they worked together to answer different questions and to do different tasks related to that primary source. So what's helpful here is that students could share the same Google slideshow with each other and they're all working on it. And then up here, there's a chat. And so students could be talking with each other as they're working through this. It's almost like a little chat within the document itself. All right. And the last one here is an English language arts one. And this was looking at literature elements. And I borrowed this from someone because I am not an ELA teacher. But students had this all divvied up and then they worked together and then they created a video afterwards. Actually, they created a video. They created a slideshow presentation afterwards on a different related topic. So that is another example there. So again, it doesn't have to be something super complex. It can just be as simple as working on slideshows together and docs. All right, next thing we're going to talk about are a couple of different discussion strategies you can use with students in large group and small group. And if you haven't looked at either one of the books that I have on the screen right now, I would really recommend doing that. They're called EDU protocols, and they're really great activities. And some of them were designed specifically for virtual learning environments. And I know a lot of teachers have really turned to these resources during e-learning and have found them really helpful. So I would recommend checking those out because the next two that I'm going to show you are ones specifically for that. So this is a discussion protocol. It's called a cyber sandwich. So it is one that's great for virtual learning. And what it is it allows students to work together to compare and contrast different resources. So it can be comparing and contrasting the same reading, and they both look at different pieces, or they notice and pick up different information than what their partner did, or it can be comparing and contrasting two different texts. So there's two ways you can do this, and I wrote this all out on the slide, but you give students the same reading, and they both work on it independently, and then they come together and share their thoughts. Or it can be they're looking at two different historical periods, two different resources, and then they come together and share and compare and contrast the information. So it's a little bit similar to a jigsaw in that sense on the second way I just explained, and that students can be looking at different resources and they really teach the other students on what it's about. But again, it's up to you. There is a blank template that I gave right here that you can borrow to facilitate this conversation, but I'm just going to show you an example here of one that's already filled out so you can see what this looks like in a real classroom setting. So the way that you use this is usually on a Google Slides document or in a Google Doc, so students can be typing out responses together. And the students put their name on the first slide and the learning objective or the resource that they're looking at. And then the second slide here would be what student A would fill out. So the teacher could put learning resources here, and then they take notes or answer the guiding questions here. So this one was specifically, these kids are looking at two different topics. Student A is looking at Rome and student B is looking at Greece. Then they come together to compare and contrast the two government systems of those places. So what students did here is they read about Rome, and then student B read about Greece and wrote down some notes here in this text box. And then the last slide is where they collaborate together. So this could maybe be a little bit later on in your lesson, or you build time into a Google Meet for this to happen. But what students do here is they share ideas together. So they're writing out things unique to Rome, things they had in common. So it's more of a collaborative activity. And then the next step in this that I've seen some teachers do is the next two slides are a space for students to write their own constructed response, or to do a Flipgrid video response, or to draw an illustration, or do something else. Now that they collaborate with the other students, they have a better, deeper understanding, and then they show their understanding independently. So that is purely up to you and your choice. The template here shows that a little bit more in depth. And how the next phase after students meet up together is make their own constructed response. So the helpful thing in that is if you're really wanting to build the critical reading skills and writing skills with your students, it's building in an opportunity for them to check their answers and to really check in with someone else and get that support and idea sharing before they do the work independently, which is constructing that response. So again, here's an example. And then the students write their own paragraph right there. So that is for you to copy and utilize as you need to. And there's even more on the EDU protocol website should you want to use those. The next one is another EDU protocol, and this one is called an Iron Chef. And if you've ever watched that TV show before, as you know, they get this task presented in front of them, and then sometimes they're giving a mystery ingredient that they have to integrate into their recipe. So the creators of this discussion protocol took a spin on that and made an educational one where you give students resources and give them an assignment, and then there's one secret ingredient they have to weave into their assignment. So maybe it's using a certain tech tool, or it's presenting about a certain piece of information, but you have them include some type of secret ingredient here. So the example that I've shown you is a collaborative activity where students were looking at different kingdoms in Africa. And again, this is social studies. This is what I did when I was in the classroom, but you could use this for a variety of things. Maybe in math class, it's different formulas or it's different problems, and they figure out how to solve the problem. And what students did in this one is they kind of did the background knowledge, and then they're working together to make a slideshow presentation based on their assigned topic. So for math class, maybe it's a slideshow presentation on how to solve a specific set of equations and to justify their response, or it's making their own equations. It's totally up to whatever you want them to do. And then the secret ingredient the students had to integrate into this specific one was they had to integrate PeerDeck. So students made their own interactive slideshow presentation instead of it just being a static one. Other ways I've seen teachers do this with students is students do a shared presentation on a topic, and then their secret ingredient is a Kahoot, or it's a Quizlet set the students made, so that students are not only mastering the topic and making a slideshow over it, but they're making a review activity that then the whole class can later use. So it's a fun way to have students be the teachers of the subject, but all be working on this together. So that is the Iron Chef example here. And the idea behind the Iron Chef, again, is that it's not a 15 slideshow presentation. It's very short, usually 5 slides, 5 to 6 slides max. So that's what is scaffolded in this activity, and it's designed to be quick and fast, and it has the special ingredient there. And part of the reason why it's quick and fast is because there's a set amount of time that students have to work on this together. But again, in e-learning, that can be a little hard. So maybe you have that split up over a couple of days, and then one day is your presentation day where you do your quick presentations and use the fun activity there. So that is an example of how you could use the Iron Chef protocol with your students to build some community and collaboration there and be working with each other. The next few activities I'm going to show you are ways to have students still be connecting with each other, but through providing feedback to one another and to really build in that reflection and sharing ideas with each other. So a way that you could do this, again, is a very simple thing. There is a really easy way to add comments and feedback to other students within Google, and that is just using the comments feature on Google Docs. They can add comments using the comment button here or insert, and they can do this whether they have editing access to the document or view only, but they can add a comment here and just share it, and then it opens up this whole conversation on the side of the document. So that is one really quick way to weave in some ways for students to still be interacting with each other, even if they're scattered in different places, is by having them review each other's work and give some constructive feedback. And it's helpful if you facilitate some of that. What are they looking for? Give them some guiding questions, maybe ask them to share 2 things that they really liked in one area the student could work on improving, or an area that they could tweak, so that when they're giving feedback, it's not just cool or great job, it's specific and a little bit more structured. And the students giving the feedback are knowing what to look for when they do that. And another way you can do this, and this is a little bit more of a structured one, is by using this template. So this is another one. I borrowed it from a colleague, and it's a feedback slideshow. And studies have shown that students giving feedback to each other is a really powerful way for them to feel connected and part of a classroom community, but also for students to practice using that. And that's really a life skill you need to have, is to be able to give feedback to others. So what this does is students are assigned a specific slide. Here's the instruction slide that explains it to them. So if you wanted to use this in your class, you can make a copy of it and share. And what you would do is students would put their product, their work right here. And then the student that is reviewing them would add their feedback down here, right below. And this specific teacher, what she did is she gave them some guiding things to look for when the students are reviewing the other student's work. So they're looking to tell something the other student did well, ask a question, and then give a suggestion. So again, it's more constructive feedback other than just simple words and things that probably won't help that student improve their work. So the student's finished assignment goes here, then the feedback goes down there. That's a really helpful way to keep it all in one place. And students would all be working on this same Google Slides presentation together. The helpful thing to make sure that they're not writing out another person's slide is to give them an assigned slide number that they're working on. And if you ever needed to toggle into a view where you can see where all of them are working on it, little hidden tip here, the bottom left corner of Google Slides, if you go into this view, then it would show you what each student was working on there. All right, so that is a fun little peer feedback facilitated conversation there. Other ways to build community with your students in virtual environments is through review games. All right, lots of ways you can do this. PeerDeck has a review game called Flashcard Factory. And this is available to you even if you don't have PeerDeck Premium. It's a part of the free suite of PeerDeck tools. But what it allows you to do is to type out vocab words and definitions, and then it makes a game out of those words. So students would join a Flashcard Factory session. You give them a link or a code and they enter it. And when they've all joined, it splits them up into 2 teams. And then when you start the game, students are given the vocab words amongst their teams. And each team member is given a task. They either have to write a definition for that vocab word all on their own, or they have to draw an illustration for that vocab word using the drawing tools on PeerDeck, and it brings them up on the screen. And then after every team member has finished their task, then at the end, it has a competition essentially where you vote on the drawing or the vocab word from each team that you felt like best went with the original vocab word. And the teacher can be the judge of that, or it's a whole class vote. It's totally up to you. That's a fun way for students to be working together there and bouncing ideas off of each other. Another way you can do this is, again, using a tool I talked about earlier, and that is Jamboard. Jamboard has a drawing tool on it as well, so you can play a fun little Pictionary review game for students. Maybe you use vocab words you've been studying in class, and one student is the artist and has editing access to the Jamboard that you're using in the session, and they draw out the term, and the other students are guessing through the chat or unmuting themselves. but that could be another fun way to kind of build in some opportunity for students to work in teams and to be sharing ideas with each other. And then another way, last thing to round out this session, is just reflection activities. So a lot of times with learning and doing activities in class, but especially in e-learning, students complete this work, they submit it to you on its learning, and then that's just kind of where it stops. So if you want to add in more opportunities for students' work to be viewed by a wider audience, rather than just you, the teacher, or them, the students, then you can build in activities where students can reflect on their work and then reflect on other students' work and their ideas. So this is an example of using a tool called Flipgrid, which is a video response tool in Google Slides. And this was inspired by an activity in a distance learning book that I read. And I borrowed this idea from another teacher as well. But you could take your own spin on this. It doesn't have to be Flipgrid that you use if you're using a different type of tool. Flipgrid is just one that I leverage because I know a lot of teachers really like it for e-learning. But what students did is they made a Flipgrid video answering the teacher's topic for the day, and then other students went and watched their peers' videos and then reflected on what they learned from that student. So again, fun way to kind of build in the opportunity for students to have their responses and their work viewed by more than just one person, the teacher. So this is the template that you can make a copy of and utilize as you need. It has instructions here. But what you would do is give students a link to this reflection question on Flipgrid. And then student watches student A's video and then they reflect. And then student B watches it and reflects here. So it's a way for them to have some structured reflection, but also be looking at other students' work there. So that is an option. And that is what I have in terms of activities and ways to kind of build some community and collaboration with your students that maybe isn't the exact same as things that you've done before. There's some great people that I borrowed some of these ideas from, and I linked their names on all of these slides and on the templates themselves. I would love to see how these activities go in your classroom if you utilize them. And if you have any questions, let me know. And PGPs will be available for this in the near future. You'll see a Google form below the video recording of this session, which you can fill out and then get your PGPs emailed to you after you submit the Google form.